As far as basic, nobody could ever pronounce my name right. I remember that. And they didn't even try. Probably after week 1, they started adding vowels, consonants, question marks. Nobody even attempted to get it right. So the drill sergeants who see a lot of crazy names just gave up. I got Lubofsky. Obviously, the Big Lebowski became popular. People put F's and W's and extra S's. And I think near the end of my basic training, it almost became a point of reference for the drill sergeants to actually intentionally screw it up. In the end of the summer of 2003, we flew back home. We flew into Bangor, Maine, and I remember I'm not a particularly emotional person, but there were 50 to 60 people there waiting for us at the airport to welcome us home. They had pay per minute cell phones so that we could call our families and tell them that we were back, and there were kids waving flags and people telling you how proud of you they were. Somebody that was almost your Vietnam vet straight out of Central Casting. He had the hat, the shirt saying that he was a Vietnam vet. He had on the camouflage pants. He was probably a little bit drunk, and he looked at my name and he said, Lubofsky, almost like my drill sergeants had done. He completely butchered it. He said, Lubofsky, it's good to have you back. And he really meant it. And I'm almost certain that I was fighting back tears, and I understood what he meant, and I felt it. When we arrived back in 2003, we were given a little time off at the end of the deployment, but we basically went back to our old units. And before you know it, everything was back to normal. And I think that's one of the things a lot of soldiers deal with when they come home. You spend a month with everybody telling you how glad they are to see you and how proud of you they are, and that they're saying you're a hero, we're proud of you. And then after the newness of coming back goes away, you go back to your job bartending. And there's just a lack of emotional and personal fulfillment in a lot of jobs that you do back home, just because of the emotional and personal fulfillment you had on deployment. You were doing something for the greater good. You were a part of something bigger. And then you come home and you're not necessarily a part of something bigger in that same way. And I think a lot of soldiers struggle with that. I think I was a little nervous in crowds. I was dealing with people being too close to me when I didn't want them to be. You were always keeping up with your blind spots. You go 6 months where you never let your rifle leave your side, and then you wake up and go to the bathroom back in civilian life, and you wonder where your rifle is. And sometimes you have to click out of that and realize, oh, I'm back in Shreveport, Louisiana. I don't need my rifle. There's a lot of that, but nothing that negatively affected me personally in a way where I felt I needed any kind of help. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit.
Plus 135-mile-an-hour winds.
Look at the damage. 90% of all buildings were badly damaged, if not destroyed.
People trapped in buildings that have come down around them. The National Guard has been dispatched.
We were there the night the hurricane hit, and we were laying down in the Superdome, and we heard the dome shake. And I think at that time we all kind of knew that it was going to be bad. We had no idea how bad it was going to be. The next morning, we woke up to do kind of a patrol of the city after the hurricane part had more or less subsided. And we were walking around the city, kind of looking at the damage, and we were thinking, oh, we're probably going to be here for a week or two. And we were contacted immediately to get back to our hub within the Superdome. And within 3 or 4 hours, everything was flooded. The cars outside of the Superdome had water coming in their windshields. It was insane. And those streets that we were walking 3 or 4 hours ago were covered in 4 or 5 feet of water. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And I was in New Orleans for the next month and a half to 2 months. We participated in a lot of search and rescue in New Orleans. Once everything kind of settled down and we went to the different neighborhoods, it was certainly a dangerous situation. You didn't know what power lines were active, what power lines weren't. You didn't know where the ditches were on a lot of the streets. You could be driving and turn the corner and there's 20 people standing on high ground hoping for somebody to come get them. It's a different moment in time when you look around and you realize this activation is to protect your own citizens. You're there to protect your own country. Within a couple of months, they started doing a reduction of forces. In 2006, my enlistment with the military ended and I was going to go back into civilian life. I had graduated with a degree in criminal justice. And so I was going to start a new version of my life. And maybe after a year and a half or maybe 2 years after being out, I think I wanted to be back in. I just didn't think that I was finished. And I wanted to go back in. I wanted to be a part of that again because there's really no fulfillment like the fulfillment you get from being around a group of guys in combat or in tough situations. There's a lot of people who never want to get out, but the connection and sense of purpose that they have in the military, it's sometimes hard to find in the civilian world. But in 2008, I got back in and began to look for ways to become a leader. I was promoted at some point to E6, a staff sergeant position. And so I was ready for my next deployment when we were notified. It was actually in 2010, we were notified that we would be deploying that next year. In 2011, we deployed again to Afghanistan. So after almost 8 years, we were going back to Afghanistan. We were tasked with doing what we had already done successfully at Bagram Air Force Base. We were tasked to do the same thing at Sharana Air Force Base, and there were also smaller bases around. I was a squad leader, an E6. I was over 15 people, 15 soldiers. I remember knowing that I was going to try to be the best leader I could be, taking the examples of what I'd learned the first deployment, good and bad. I remember that lesson of I have this position of leadership to protect the people under me. There was one time we were being sent to the Ghazni province to build a half shell, almost like an auditorium type station for higher ups to come visit, talk to the soldiers, maybe even set up as a classroom training area. We were sent over there, and the materials that we needed to get started weren't even there. And my people had been working every day, all the way through Saturday, Sundays. And I remember giving them the rest of the afternoon off. Go back to your tents. Don't let anybody see you. Lay low. Take the day off. And so we did. And within hours, an RPG had landed almost directly behind where we were set up. I think that was an important thing for me to learn. I understood it at, different times in my life, 9/11, certain national tragedies you see, that sometimes it's just dumb luck, that this life is very fragile, that it can be a series of choices or just one. It could have easily been that an RPG had hit the tents where my guys were staying at, and they wouldn't have been there if I wouldn't have given them the day off. I understand that life, especially overseas and especially in combat, sometimes it's just, there's nothing you can do. You can't live wondering what would have happened if. You have to make the best decisions for you, for the people around you, the people you love and the people you work with, the people under you and the people over you. You just have to make the best decision with the information you have available, and understand that you could make the right decision and it could all go to hell. Or you could make the wrong decision and everything could work out perfectly. Sometimes you just have to make the decision and own it, whether it goes well or whether it goes poorly. It's your decision, you own it. I was placed over what they call a building materials yard. It was a BOM yard, basically providing supplies to a particular region of Afghanistan with any kind of building supplies they needed, whether electrical, wood, screw, like anything. Basically Afghanistan's version of Home Depot. I was tasked to be over that. We were there in Sharana for a few months, and then we had succeeded in that task to the point where they sent us to these much smaller areas to do the same thing. Our success in Sharana had almost bit us by having us sent to smaller, less hardened, less safe areas to do the same thing. We were one facet within a greater program, within a greater mission, and all of those facets needed to work together. One of my least favorite things in soldier culture is that if you're not special forces, that your service is somehow lesser. I would much rather be proud in silence for my service than to be praised outwardly for somebody else's. It's important for soldiers to be proud of their service, whether you were a cook, whether you were running a building materials yard, or whether you were in the mountains looking for the enemy. I think it's important to be proud for your service. Be proud for what you did. But most soldiers have my story. They were supporting the people that were trained to do the things that we weren't. You hear a lot of times about stolen valor, and you think that it's some guy that works at Starbucks that's never served, puts on a uniform and pretends to be a soldier. And I would take that one step forward. I would never take the accomplishments and take the valor of somebody else that did something and wear it as my own when I hadn't earned it. And I think one of the things that's the most important thing for me, for all of us to get across, is that it takes all of us, and that you should be proud. If you were a cook, you still spent 7 months, 12 months away from your family. You still had to worry about what was going on back at home. You still had to worry about RPGs or attacks that nobody was ready for. If you went over there and served, you should be proud of your service and proud of your service alone. At the end of the second deployment, it was a different kind of pride. My first deployment, I was proud of myself for making it through. At the end of my second deployment, I was proud for the way I had led the people under me. I was proud that they had been safe, that I knew that I took care of them to the best of my abilities. Whether it worked out or not, I knew that I had done everything I could to be a good leader, to be a good soldier, and as much as I could to bring everybody back the way they came. So after my second deployment, came back stateside and began working full-time with the National Guard, working with their suicide prevention program. dealing with soldiers who were dealing with suicidal ideations, also training leaders on how to best deal with soldiers who were dealing with suicidal ideations, thoughts, and also how to deal with soldiers who have lost somebody to suicide. It was a very important job within the military at the time. A lot of people come back from overseas with PTSD, but a lot of soldiers deal with issues back home. And so it was a different job for me in the military, but it was also very important. So the end of my military career was basically training the people under me to become leaders and finding a way to step away when I needed to. The closer it came time, I knew I was going to retire. I wasn't always the best person to be around, but I knew it was time to have the people under me that I knew were real leaders. I knew it was time for me to move away and for other people to step up. And at some point, for many people who are in the service, they want to see what the next episode of their life looks like. They want to see what the next chapter is. I would say that near the end of my military career, I was very, very excited about what my life held once I put the boots up. So in February of 2023, I reached my 20 years and I put in for my retirement. And I can say that I'm very proud of my service. I'm very proud of the people that I served with, the things that I did. And at the end of 20 years, I can look back on it and I know that I was a good soldier and that I'm proud of my service. And I wear my service proudly, although sometimes quietly. I'm very, very proud of what I did.